Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break, episode 22, MiSTer. And in this episode, as you can probably already tell by the layout, I'm joined by a couple of guests that are going to be awesome. They're both enthusiasts and people who really are passionate about the MiSTer. And this is something, before I get into it a little bit too much, I am the ignorant novice, and the whole kind of purpose and reason and the idea behind this episode of the podcast is that in 2019, my good friend over here, EvanGrill, we were at SGDQ 2019, and for over a year, he had been in my ear about the MiSTer is cool, it's awesome, you can't wait, you're gonna love playing with it, and was putting on the hard sell for the MiSTer. And I gotta be honest, I didn't quite get it until he let me play it in our, when we were at SGDQ, and a whole bunch of things started clicking, and that's the whole idea for what we're about to dive into and get into. So first, let me introduce my good friend, EvanGrill. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Thanks for being here. And also joined by very special guest, Owlnonymous. Thanks for being here, man.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. So let's do a quick, just kind of intro. Like, Al, kind of tell us a little bit about yourself. What kind of what is kind of your thing as far as retro gaming and all that kind of stuff, and then how you got involved with the MiSTer.
Okay, I've been streaming for about 5 years, mostly all retro. I'm usually all original hardware. That's like what I prided on for the longest time. So I was like OSSC, RGB modded, original hardware, flash carts. I also feature arcade stuff and pinball. With pinball is my mainstay every Wednesday, and I do pinball cameras. I have like a bunch of cameras, a ridiculous setup, just to share, a hobby. But yeah, the MiSTer grabbed me about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, and I haven't looked back. All of my original hardware, unfortunately, has dust on it, and I'm ashamed of it. But right. Also, it's also amazing. So
no, absolutely, couldn't agree more. And then Evan, kind of what's how do you fit into the whole retro scene?
Well, I mean, I've been playing games since I was a little kid, and I do small electronics repair is a hobby of mine. So I do some mod work, and I do. And I got a MiSTer, like a year and a half ago or so. Once I kind of realized what it was, I was like, ooh, this sounds really cool. And I jumped on, and I mean, I have real consoles, but
somewhere.
Yeah, the MiSTer is my go-to.
And I think it's important to note that, like, anytime Evan's done modifications on my consoles before, so he's typically my go-to person if there's anything like, how do I play this on this into this? He's definitely been kind of my go-to person as far as getting retro hardware to be able to play it nowadays, since we don't have a lot of the same things we had back in the day. So
when I was in college, I worked at the Apple Store, and I became known as the person to go to if you want to connect device A to device B.
Nice. Very cool. Okay. We'll take a quick break. I think Al had to step out for just a moment, so hope he's okay. While we're waiting, have you done any mods on your Genesis, Evan?
Not yet. I actually have two of them. I have a Model 2 and a Model 1. The Model 1 supposedly works. I've gotten games to work in it. I just haven't really played around with it much. I have not done any of the cool triple bypass mods yet.
Ah, yes, the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, are you good to go, Al? Do we need to take a break or anything like that?
Oh no, just my eyes dried up. Everything's good.
Cool. Okay. So Al, I'm going to throw the first question to you, and if you could please, what is MiSTer, and what is the MiSTer? Let's start with that.
Okay. I'm going to do a little bit of reading here.
Please.
Just because I want to make sure I have my verbiage correctly. The MiSTer is an open source project that aims to use like an off-the-shelf development board to recreate an all-in-one FPGA console. It starts off with like a Thoracic DE10 Nano, which is put out there by Intel to teach people how to use FPGAs. It's not meant for retro gaming. Like we're just using this really powerful FPGA that's subsidized. It should be like $300, and it's $140, $130. It was $120 when I started this.
Yeah.
To do retro gaming, and then we add all kinds of stuff on the top and bottom of it to make it like the ultimate console.
Does and Evan, I guess this could be for you, Evan. Is it able to play if you were just to buy the board? Does that enough to get you to play, or do you need what are the kind of some of the things to just make it workable or playable at a very, let's say Nintendo? We just wanted to start at a base level.
So I would have to look, but in general, You can do some of the consoles right out of the box, but most of them want a add-on RAM board. And those come in 32, 64, or 128 megabytes. But the 32 is all you need unless you're playing basically on a Neo Geo. The Neo Geo core is the only one that uses larger than that right now. That might change, but right now it's the only one that uses more.
So I'm going to go back to you, Al. What were some of like then the first of all, what was the first build you have of it? What kind of add-ons did you add on right away? And what were your first cores and consoles that you were playing on the MiSTer?
Right. So my very early builds, which a few of my friends have, because I built them I've been building them for people for about a year now. It comes with a clear top shell. I would just put that on the bottom and mount a cheap $7 OTG USB hub from Amazon. And then you at least need a 32 megabit SD RAM, like mentioned, for like a good bit of the cores. There's about like 7 or 8 cores that doesn't require any SD RAM. You can run the TurboGrafx, you can run the Genesis, you can run a lot of the early arcade cores. But yeah, those were my first early builds. And then later ones, I wanted to have the analog I/O. There's an analog board that you can put on top to get you to give you analog out in audio and video. And that's how I shoot out my image to a PVM and then HDMI to the capture at the same time. Most of the cores have dual outputs. So for a streamer or a content creator, it's like perfect.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, the question comes up right away before we get into some of the more technical and some of the more interesting things you can do with it. Why would somebody choose to why would the MiSTer be your purchase? Like, why would you consider doing this instead of the retro, going down and buying an old Nintendo and stuff like that? Evan, I'll throw it to you. Yeah, first.
The MiSTer's only, even the full package, is only about this big. It's maybe 6 inches wide by 4 inches by 4 inches or so.
Yeah, it's like 3 Genesis cards stacked on top of each other.
Yeah. And it does all of the consoles it does. It does a whole ton of retro computers. And it has cores for a ton of arcade games, especially the Neo Geo, where the cheapest games start at $50 or $60 and go up to thousands of dollars.
Yeah, and even getting on a TV is going to be another couple $100.
Yep.
So before I do some of the add-ons and things like that, what is the native output of the MiSTer?
HDMI.
HDMI.
I mean, it comes with the D10 Nano has an HDMI port, and then you have to add on stuff to get or use the direct video dongles. You can actually use video dongles now too. Yeah, I can't forget about that. There's an analog board. There's a digital board. And then there's you can use like a cheap HDMI to VGA, HDMI to all kinds of different dongles to get your direct video output that way as well. You're asking what should you do, like if you're going to jump in?
No. Well, I'm asking if somebody is brand new to this, because one of the things I've noticed, at least for me, and then I've heard others mention this at all, is this barrier to entry. It seems a bit complicated because of the add-ons and the things. Am I just overthinking it, or is it as simple as I could buy this thing, I could get the RAM thing, and I could plug it right into my modern TV? Like, is it that simple?
So everyone that's been intimidated with the barriers of entry, I just tell them to watch. Like, I made a video on how to set up everything. It's if you've ever set up a Raspberry Pi, if you've set up RetroArch, if you've set up an emulator, you're gonna know how to do this. Okay. Basically, you use an SD card tool, and that gives you a couple partitions, but the only one you care about is FAT32, so you can put it on your computer, and then you just drop the ROMs on there, and you run one script, and the script downloads everything for you. So the script downloads all the soft cores, everything, and it creates the folder structure. So you basically just drag and drop stuff.
Yeah. And if you can edit a config file, like you've edited a config file in a text editor, then you're good. That's the most complicated thing you have to do, is changing video modes a little bit.
And you don't even have to do that now.
And you don't,
there's a script to do that for you.
Yep.
I think this is a good time actually to touch on it. One of the things that I notice, it seems like every day there is new support for something with the MiSTer. And I think initially that was part of my struggle with understanding what this thing is capable of, because it seemed like every day there was something new and new and new. And it still seems like that way. But one of the things I've learned is that's an advantage, because there's this huge community support. Is there a way to sum up or at least broadly touch upon the community support for this project?
Community support is amazing. Like it's a huge scene. Everybody's still super excited about it. It reminds me, because I'm gamer. It reminds me of like the early scenes of emulators when like the N64 was being emulated. Like there's no way the N64 is being emulated. Like it's all these different people and different passions bringing what they like. Jatego likes Capcom, so he's bringing all the early Capcom stuff to you. Yeah. So yeah, people are super awesome. I haven't really met anybody negative, and everybody's willing to help.
Yeah.
Sorry, Evan.
Oh, and the one really cool thing is we've started to see some of the people moving from the emulator space over to the MiSTer. In the last 2 weeks, there's just been all of the people that have previously worked on TurboGrafx 16 and PC Engine emulation are moving really quickly over to the MiSTer, and we're seeing updates, and we're seeing very promising things. There's not an official announcement yet, but there's very promising things. They're starting to do better versions of the video chip, and there's the expectation we might see Turbo CD or PC Engine CD soon.
And I guess that's, so is there, we can include this in the show notes and things like that. Is there a place that is like of the list of currently supported cores, or maybe we could briefly list off and I'll throw this over to Al, like what are the currently supported consoles or cores as they're called for the MiSTer?
Okay, I'm just going to pull up the GitHub is actually the best place for information.
Perfect.
So I'll pull up the GitHub here. It's and I can post it in your chat.
Yeah, please do. That's great.
All right. So the current support, because like you're saying, it's exciting that new things come out. So stuff comes out every week. It's kind of like getting like digital mail. Like, hey, you now have a Sega Genesis. Hey, now you have an Auric 1 super rare computer. But yeah, currently it's broken down to.
This is a great list.
Computers Classic. So you have all these old like Amiga. I'm sure it's CPC.
Yeah,
CPC is dope, by the way.
C64,
Commodore. Yeah, Commodore 6. I have like legitimately smitten with a Commodore 64. Being a kid in the US, I didn't have one. So now that I'm able to play it, it's amazing.
So cool.
The MSX is so cool. There's a lot of early Konami on MSX. There's so many games that on Nintendo are MSX ports or started off on the MSX.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then we have the classic early consoles, so Atari 2600, Genesis, Game Boy, Mega Drive, Neo Geo, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, TurboGrafx 16, and then there's like other stuff coming out. So there's an Arduino board, Chip 8, and then there's like a unique Flappy Bird is basically a proof of concept and kind of an April Fool's joke, but it's unique platform. So that's saying you could use the MiSTer as a platform to create your game for.
Yep.
Evan, what's the processor in this thing? What's the underlying processor in it?
I think it's the largest end Cyclone 5. The Cyclone 5 is offered in 3 or 4 different sizes, and those are actual physical sizes. The bigger they are, the more logic units it has on the board, so the more it can do.
Got it.
I think they're using the largest one.
Yeah, it's a beast.
Yeah, it used to be made by Altera, and it's Intel bought Altera, so that's where we're at now.
So, this is a question that came from Twitter, and there's a good time for it. I want to make sure I get it right. 40 Watt asks, so he's a big fan. So I got to give a quick shout out to 40 Watt Rage, because he's actually one of the people who I thought of. He made a really interesting tweet about speedrunning that we'll get to in just a second. Yeah. But he goes, as a big fan myself, and now has become a de facto speedrunning console, what is the most advanced console that is theoretically supported by the MiSTer and could realistically be supported? Theoretically and realistically. I'll throw that one to Al. Or Evan, okay.
I think probably PlayStation.
Yeah.
PlayStation 1 would probably be the limits. I mean, I sent over a sheet of the usage for the FPGA portion of the Altera 5.
Correct.
So like I guess the most used core is the AO486, which is a 486 based computer. But yeah, I mean, the sky is the limit as long as the logic's there. The logic gates, room for the logic gates is there.
Yeah. There definitely is someone presently working on a PlayStation core. It's not near testing yet, but it's getting close. There's also talk of like similar consoles of the era, the Nintendo 64, the Saturn. those are maybe more theoretical. Like it could do that, but maybe not at full speed. Because that's the question: is can it recreate it, but can it also recreate it at full speed? And they're not sure on those. And that list that Owl sent you, we'll throw it in the show notes. It's a little high level, but one of the things you're going to notice is there's some of the cores seem to use a lot of the Super Nintendo is using 75% of the FPGA, but that's because it loads all of the special chips all at once. It rather than load them like it used to be the SD2 SNES, now it's the FX pack. The way the FX pack works is it actually looks at the ROM and says, oh, this ROM needs a Super FX chip, let's load that. So it loads it on demand. This loads them all at once. So that FPGA is loaded with special chips. What's cool is I think there's a couple of ROMs that use multiples that you never would actually be able to use in real life, but now you can because this loads all of them at once.
That's really interesting. So I that it leads me to a real, one of the things that I noticed, I had a Raspberry, or I still have a Raspberry Pi, and I was loading up the emulators on it and everything like that. And one of the things I've noticed really has happened, I guess, as long as emulators have been around, is to emulate the hardware the best it possibly can. And so in the case of the NES, you would still get a lot of the lag that existed in the games originally because that's the way the hardware would handle it. Does the MiSTer do the same thing with the cores, or is this something where we can get rid of it? Like how does it take on something like that?
Go ahead, Evan.
Well-written cores will absolutely lag at the same points that real hardware will, because they are representing the same hardware. That said, some of the cores have options to increase sprite limits and things like that, and that will actually reduce the slowdown. It's controversial, but it's there.
It's amazing. Like if you're not speedrunning it and you just want to play like an old Nintendo game that has a lot of flicker, as long as the flicker is not hard coded into its actual utilization, not hard coded, you can eliminate a lot of flicker by adding extra sprite limit and also putting the CPU on turbo. I don't know if the NES one has that, but that has sprite limit for sure. Yeah.
I have a Super SD System 3 plugged into my PC Engine, and for those that aren't aware, it's like a flash cart, but it plugs into the console. And on CD games, it gets rid of. It speeds up the loading time on CDs, which, depending on what kind of speed run you're doing or whatever, but for a casual playthrough, it's awesome. It's amazing. It's great to get rid of this. Is the MiSTer able to do things like that? And is that something that you have to go in and tweak with some sweat settings, or is this something that can be supported, pretty quickly once you get up and going?
Are you talking about for speedrunning?
No, I'm saying just for with CDs. I'm saying with CDs, the stuff that and are any CD units actually supported at this time?
Currently there's the Mega Drive CD is supported, and you can load whatever BIOS you want.
Cool.
Like Evan mentioned earlier, we believe that the PC Engine CD core is being worked on.
Very cool.
The Amiga has some CD support in the back for the CD32 games, but it doesn't have audio. But yeah, that is, as long as there's room and there's people willing to commit time to it, it could definitely happen. Like Jaguar could come, Jaguar CD could come.
Yeah, there's a beta Jaguar core right now, and it's working. I don't know that it has CD support yet, but I've actually done it on stream. I've used it on stream.
I hear this word get thrown around a lot, and I think I have a better understanding of it now thanks to Evan and a lot of other people who've helped educate me. But what exactly is an FPGA, and what does it enable? Like, what is it? What does that make why does it make this whole thing possible? And I'll throw it over to Evan first.
So there's two reasons that you would use an FPGA traditionally. One is that you would use it as a development board. So you want to create a custom integrated circuit, but you want to be able to change it until you get it finalized. So you would do that on an FPGA until you got it finalized, then you would send off to a factory to have them made as custom. The other would be situations where you want to have a chip that can be changed on demand. And that's kind of what the MiSTer project is we have a system where we want to be able to change that chip on demand.
And so that leads to a great question we have from the chat that says, I have a question. An FPGA is FPGA for a Sega Saturn really far away? Because is possible, I'm sorry, I'm messing up the language here, but is an FPGA on the Sega Saturn, Sega 32X, is that something that could be possible for the system?
Well, the Sega Saturn's kind of a hot mess. It's, I mean, if we're talking about the original hardware, it's multiple things patched on top of each other because that's the way Sega did development. They just kept on adding things. It's a beautiful hot mess, but it would be very difficult for an FPGA Saturn. What was the other one you mentioned? You mentioned
32X.
32X is possible, but I've also heard what's the bother because there's like 6 to 8 games. It would be very difficult. It could come with time, but I've heard it's not a priority.
Yeah, they would have to probably rewrite the way the video output works because the 32X doesn't just add some power to the system. It actually adds a layer on top of the video. And so you get the Genesis rendered video that gets output, and then the 32X takes that video and adds extra video on top of it.
Yeah, kind of like the laser active stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever messed with that.
So wild, so cool. What I'm getting from a lot of this, though, is that, if there's a community, there's no barrier to entry for development. If somebody, minus the hardware limitations, obviously, but I mean, if somebody wants to try to develop a 32X, if they could do so. There's nothing that's going to prevent them from doing that. Am I understanding that?
They would be welcomed with open arms.
Awesome.
We've actually even had people pull money together to go ship people D10s to get on the platform.
Yeah.
That's how we've gotten some of the Japanese developers on board.
Yeah, is giving them the hardware.
With the most recent quarantining and self-isolation, have there been any slowdowns in getting and ordering hardware, or is it still readily available?
Very much so.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of the chips and supplies, not for the D10 itself because you can still order those, but for the suppliers, they've all dried up because of the parts are sourced from China.
Gotcha.
So
cool.
there is a delay on some of the stuff. So if you're interested in the MiSTer, I would just start with the D10, get that shipped to you a month later on Amazon, or order it directly from somebody else, another supplier, and start playing around. And then you can always, it's a modular system. That's the best. One of the best things about it is you can just keep on adding stuff or taking stuff away.
Yep.
Okay, so just to let you know, Zoom is going to shut us down here in 5 minutes, or 6 minutes. So we'll just stop and we'll restart it up again because we're about halfway through. There's still a lot of stuff I want to get to. Let's see. We already went over a bit. What are some of the disadvantages? What are some of the drawbacks to using the MiSTer compared to actual hardware? And I'll start with you, Al.
Okay, I have something prepared here.
Oh, awesome, nice.
All right, yeah. So some of the features that are super easy, like on emulation, they're hard to implement via FPGA. Stuff like save states, like filters, just extended stuff that's super easy to do when you're not using the original hardware. It's like if you want to have a save state on the Game Boy Advance. So the Game Boy Advance is one of the only cores that has save states. It has fast forward and rewind as well. They basically, since they have it on FPGA form, they could actually get that processed and made into a chip and make a Game Boy that does save states. So like you're making the original hardware have that support. So that's why it's so much harder than just with an emulator when you don't have any actual physical constraints.
Cool. That seems reasonable. I mean, it's obviously there's are there any others? Evan looked like you might want to add it in there.
No, that would basically be what I would describe.
The only other thing I would add is that the core is only as good as the author who wrote it. So, like, if a core, it depends on how much accuracy, the detail that they want to put into it. We have different cores that are ideas of how something works, and then it's implemented FPGA, and then we have people like Furtek that are decapping stuff, and it is exact 100%.
Yeah.
You could send this to print to have a replacement part. Because Furtek was actually... Furtek for the Neo Geo was making replacement parts, and we kind of like pulled him over here and be like, "Hey, you have all that description language and you have all this stuff. Do you want a MiSTer? Do you want to work on the MiSTer?" And they did, and it's the most amazing core. It's one of the most amazing cores that we have on the MiSTer because it's incredibly accurate.
I did think of one other thing you can't do with the MiSTer, and that's use actual carts.
Oh, true, very true.
So if we're doing this all above board, you have to somehow dump your existing carts, and then,
I got you.
And I've been told that the MiSTer couldn't even use carts because of the input.
Oh,
you couldn't. We couldn't adapt the USB. You would have to, honestly, you could have some kind of USB card reader, but it would actually dump the ROM and then send it but it wouldn't actually be running off the cartridge.
Yeah, and if that's the way we did it, then it wouldn't support flash cards, because that's how they work.
That leads to an interesting question that Vampire MSX actually asked a little bit earlier, and he goes, he's a part of an emulator team, but he says that the developing for an FPGA type, like an FPGA, is actually a different skill set, or it's a different type of thing. What is that? Why doesn't it kind of work the same way? And forgive my ignorance.
Evan, do you want to try that?
Yeah. So emulators in general tend to recreate the output. So their goal, and this may be oversimplifying it, or I might be speaking out of turn here, but their general goal is to get the result, which is the video on the screen and the game you play. Whereas for the MiSTer and for an FPGA type of setup, their goal is one-to-one recreation. Because it's dedicated hardware, it's more realistic. They could do the one-to-one recreation, because that's, with emulators, that's really hard to do. That's really hard to run an entire another computer on top of your computer and have it run at full speed and 100% accuracy. So a lot of times what they're doing is they'll make shortcuts that result in the same thing, but don't do it in the same manner. And as a result, sometimes we'll do it a little faster, or sometimes it'll do it a little slower.
Right. Yeah, and the MiSTer, what they're doing is they're taking the original schematics and logic and converting it to hardware description language. So then it basically recreates the logic and recreates all the connections, and it's a lot more difficult. I don't know if it's a lot more difficult, but it's more tedious. I don't know.
No, it's the thing that kind of blows my mind still. Like I'm hearing you guys describe this, and I understand it's trying to read a game like the actual Nintendo does, and that still blows my mind that we're at a point where we can actually start to work toward. I mean, it's doing it. It's not even working towards it. It's actually doing that. Let's go through some of the hardware and the displays, controllers, and peripherals that are compatible. Okay, so I've got my base. I'm understanding now myself. I'm understanding much better actually what the base is of the MiSTer project. What are some of the things that I can add on, and what kind of extra modules and boards? And there's a great picture and display of one. Al, why don't you take us through a little bit of, actually tell us what you've got there, and walk us through a little bit what's on that.
Okay, so this is the ultimate MiSTer case. MiSTer Add-ons makes a very similar case. The outside is made of PCB material. So in the middle is the DE10. And the bottom is like a powered USB hub. And then, so I have Ethernet hooked up. I have a controller port hooked up. And then the top is the analog I/O with a fan. And then 3 buttons. There's like a home button. There is an OSD, like bring up the on-screen display. And then there's a reset button, just like hitting reset on a Nintendo. And then if you look, I have a bunch of stuff going out as well. Yeah. So analog out, power out, and then HDMI out, and then the front is all the controllers I have hooked up.
Both you and Evan mentioned earlier, and this is where my mind started to get really blown, is that there are analog to digital analog converters, so you can actually end up, there are modules where you can play this thing on a CRT TV. And yeah, well, there you go. Okay. Plugged into a PVM. Perfect. Yeah. Why don't we, I guess at this point, we should start going through some of the costs, because that was Bald Nate's question on Twitter, is like, you talked about what the base model is going to cost. What is, like, let's say, what if I want to plug this thing into my CRTV, what's that going to cost? What additional things am I going to need?
Okay, you would want, let me get it back to me. So yeah, you'd want to buy the D10. Okay. You'd at least want a 32 megabit SD RAM, maybe 128 if you wanted to use the full Neo Geo category library, or if you just want to be future proofing a little bit, and then a cheap ODG hub, like a USB hub, or you could go powered. It all, like I'm saying, it's all, you don't have to jump in the $400 to get into the MiSTer. You can start with the D10, get the cheapest RAM, get a direct video dongle, and shoot it out to an old monitor, a PVM, an old computer monitor, component. Like, there's a lot of ways you can play on an old TV. That's like one of the biggest appeals about the MiSTer for me, was playing on the original monitor, on an old monitor, and then HDMI to the stream. I'm like, as long as the emulation's good, it's I'm game. So the first thing I did, the very first build I did, is I play Gimmick. Gimmick's a really hard Famicom game, and I play Heberiki as well. Heberiki has, like, 3 frame perfect tricks right after? Nailed them right away. Same stuff, same thing with Gimmick. I'm able to do it. And that's like, when you first get into the MiSTer, you're like, you get people over, you're like, here, play this. Like try to do this. See if this is any different. Because I was doing this at GDQ, and people are like, wow, this feels real.
Yeah. I am talking about controllers a little bit, because obviously you want to play with some type of controller. It, out of the box, will support, I believe, most DirectX and X input devices. So DirectX and X input are the 2 dominant PC protocols for controllers. Your Xbox 360 and Xbox One controllers both use X input. You can use things like, let me see if I have one around. You can use things like a Bliss box.
Oh, was that what you were getting at?
Aha, yeah.
That's so awesome.
You can also use the 8-bit DOE retro controllers. This one happens to be the 2.4 gigahertz M30. The nice thing about this is it's extremely low lag. Between this and using it on a CRT, you're not going to notice a huge amount of lag. It's enough that like a light gun wouldn't work directly with this type of interface, but the controllers work just fine. The last and most complicated are either the Blister, which is the Bliss box in a USB hub form built specifically for the MiSTer, or the new snack adapters.
Right.
And the snack adapters, the big thing that they do is they actually wire directly to the FPGA. Like, it's a USB interface, but the way the USB works is it's just direct pins that go right to the FPGA. And therefore, the cores operate on the controller just like an actual console does with a controller.
Yeah,
it
there's
has
no
direct
USB
access
processing.
to the pins. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
And those are fast enough to use a light gun.
Yeah, so the MiSTer by default, as long as if you run a script, it has 1 millisecond polling. So it's a specialized Linux kernel that's super fast. The native rate of polling for most consoles is 1 millisecond. So there's, like, he mentioned the controller he has, I think, if you plug it in, it's less than a millisecond.
Right. Less than
this cheap iBuffalo Super Nintendo controller, this is less than a millisecond. Yeah. So you're not going to have any added lag with that 1 millisecond and a low lag USB controller. But, like, what Evan was mentioning with, like, the Gamer Pro, for example, and with Snack, you can get it has a level shifter built into it, and that allows you to plug directly into the side of the MiSTer, the GPIO pins, which has like a USB style head, but it's not USB. And then you could use your original controllers. Like, my favorite Nintendo controller is a Sansui SSS Joy Card. It's an oversized Famicom controller.
Yeah, but it looks like a Famicom.
Amazing. And then because like I'm a controller freak. Like since I have the original hardware, I have all the original controllers. The shuttle pad for the PC Engine is the best controller for the
God,
PC
I'm jealous
Engine.
of that. That thing is not cheap.
Oh, I got mine for like $10, I think.
What? Oh, I'm so jealous. Okay.
But yeah, the input lag is definitely, as long as if you're playing on a PVM or if you're playing on a low lag HDMI monitor, you have a low lag controller, lag is not going to be an issue. Lag was my biggest issue with the RetroPie. When I used to set up RetroPies and help friends set it up. It's like, it just something doesn't feel right. All the new classics, they're amazing, but they're not for us. They're not for like the die-hard gamer.
Right.
You're not going to be able to speedrun stuff on a Super Nintendo Classic or the TurboGrafx 16 Classic that's coming out.
One more thing you
Speaking
can
of
plug into your MiSTer for some authentic.
We busted out the arcade sticks. Here we go.
So what's interesting with this is I got this really cheap because this is a first run of the tournament edition for the PS3, and it literally only works with the PS3.
Yeah, it doesn't matter on the MiSTer.
No, it actually doesn't work with the MiSTer either.
I thought that's what we used it at Games Done Quick, Evan.
It is. I bought for $20 a Mayflash Magic S.
Got it.
And this converts the signal to X input, and so it works perfectly.
Does that add any lag to it?
Not that I've seen, but
Yeah.
I haven't done a lot of testing on it.
You could put a Cthulhu or a Brooks board or something like that in there as well.
Yeah. But having this is really nice because especially once the CPS one stuff is out, being able to play Street Fighter on a full arcade switch would be really nice.
Well, and this is where I kind of rethought actually a lot of what I thought about retro playing games on actual hardware and stuff, because Evan found one of the monitors at SGDQ that had the RetroTink plugged in, and right now I don't know if Evan's going to remember this, but the RetroTink is actually getting quite popular, which is great because it's a great solution to easily get any kind of most old consoles up onto a modern display. And I was playing with my TurboGrafx 16 controller, or my PC Engine controller, on Evan's MiSTer, and I was speedrunning, and I got to tell you, I could not tell the difference between that and my PVM and my PC Engine at home. And you have to experience to really have that light bulb moment, but in my opinion, it was indistinguishable. And and that's where I really thought, oh my God, this is for real. This thing is absolutely for real.
The first time you have 5 minutes on it, you'll change. I'm a original hardware guy. Mm-hmm. I hate it. I used to be the biggest hardware Nazi about stuff. Yeah, that's a horrible word, but yeah, like for the longest time.
But you're anal about your hardware, you know, like it was important to you that you play these things on the old thing. I totally get it.
It was very important. Yeah, it was very important.
Yeah. So
you change.
I appreciate that, and it seems one of the things that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like just as if we're getting new core developments almost every single day, the support for different types of USB devices and actual hardware seems to be continually evolving as well. Is that accurate, and is there a vibrant community around that as well?
Yeah, there's always something going on.
Well, okay, so Uber Disco is saying that I'm selling this like as if I was selling it on the Home Shopping Network. And okay, here's the reason why. And this is kind of the
dragon on the blade. There's a dragon printed on the blade.
I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but so 40 Watt Range made this tweet that, and this was a few months, maybe it was a couple months ago now, that he kind of saw the future of speedrunning of old retro games and consoles is going to be happening on things like an FPGA, or in this case, specifically the MiSTer. And at first I was like, what is he, you know, all the high level, I'm looking at every Mario game is still run on original hardware. Like nobody is, or at least now Mario 64 is moving over to Wii, but I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening still on the original hardware. And I'm like, wait a minute, hang on a sec. Let me think about this though. Here's my thoughts, and then I'd love to get the panel's thoughts, because I think it's a really interesting question. And that is that, let's take the CD consoles for instance. The lasers are dying. They're going to die. Their hardware is dying out. Like it physically at some point this stuff is going to fail. But there's definitely a future in the MiSTer and the FPGAs and what we can do with chips and things like that. And so that's where I started to come around on it. And then after playing it and noticing that I couldn't really tell the difference, I was hard nosed to disagree with him. And I'm curious what the panel thinks about that. We'll start with that.
So there's no dispute if you use original hardware. So like you can't argue anything.
Right.
So I still honor and still, you know, if you want to play on original hardware, that's fine. As long as the core is as accurate as an emulator is, then I don't see any difference in allowing, you know, a lot of runs in speedrun.com allow emulators or allow original hardware. You know, it just needs to be in the descriptor. On stuff that there is an advantage, like CD stuff, if it reads faster, that needs to be compensated for just as they compensate in other speedruns. You know, like stuff that runs on a GameCube or Wii. You have different loading times, so you have to do a calculator for some of them. Yeah, it definitely has advantages, you know, for speedrunners. You can change, or you can load different games quickly. You can play on original hardware and then still have a high quality, you know, 1080p for the stream. You can use any controller you want. So if you have a favorite Nintendo controller and you want to use it on the Genesis or whatever, you could do something like that as well.
Any other thoughts, Evan, there?
No. One of the things that always comes up with emulator support for speedrunning is that a lot of games, especially the games that have hundreds of runners, will set a threshold. So if you're within 5% of the world record time-wise, right, then you have to be on real hardware. Below that, they're like, just learn the game, get good at it, do whatever you got to do. When you really start getting competitive, they may require you to be on real hardware. And it really depends on who knows about FPGAs. I definitely imagine there are going to be some games where they've never heard. There's some moderators that have never heard of the MiSTer, never heard of an FPGA console. They're gonna think you're cheating, or they're not gonna know the difference.
Right.
I know that 40-watt range got at least one time on Super Mario World 11 exits approved. So Super Mario World, at the very least, is accepting it, and if they're accepting them,
That's cool.
most games are going to start accepting them. That's one of those heavy hit games.
Yeah, the Super Nintendo core is built really, really well. That's by SRG 320, another person that's supposed to be working on the PC Engine stuff. And they also brought the Make a CD stuff to the FPGA, to the MiSTer.
I think the chat is actually reading my mind on where I want to go next with this because, as somebody who had put some money into all of these ridiculous retro consoles I have now, I was thinking the cost actually seemed a bit high to me to get something that I would have wanted to play on after I got the RAM and I got, all these things. But the more I started thinking about it, and this is where 40 Watts tweet stuck in my brain again, I'm like, let's say you're starting from nothing. Let's say you just, you've been using the emulators and you'd like to use some actual hardware. Right now, my local retro shop, and in Southern California, we're lucky. We have a bunch of retro shops. For $80, I can go get the Nintendo, the controller, and a couple of games. Everyone in town sells a package that's like that. But for just a little bit more, like we're talking, maybe an extra $100 or whatever, I can have the 6 consoles that I have right in front of me and played just as if I was playing on the original consoles. Maybe I can go buy some controllers. I can do whatever it is for me. So I think the cost thing, when I start thinking about this, especially if you're just starting out, like this would make sense. Cost-wise.
Well, I ask you the question: you went and bought your $100 Nintendo and a couple games and controller or whatever. How do you get that into your capture card?
And that's where I spent another. How much was an RGB mod? I don't know. It was expensive. It was more than $100. I don't remember how much it was, but
yeah, I'm kind of shocked whenever somebody considers the price being expensive. Is because if I have a ridiculous quality original hardware stream, I had to buy a G-SCART W, like a SCART splitter. I had to buy all the original RGB cables, the RGB mods,
the SG Retrovision cables,
all the EverDrives for the system to play. Like all the controllers, like all of that kind of gets pushed down to about $200-$300 on the MiSTer if you're doing it. And then you have every flash card. You have perfect RGB signal. You have perfect 1080p signal. You got it's a ridiculous value. Once you get it in your house and you're playing, there's always an aha moment. Even people because I've built maybe 40 MiSTers now. There's a week later after they get it, they're like, oh my gosh, I thought it was going to be cool, but it's changing everything. People are playing, old games that they played when they were a kid, and they're finding new games. Like, it's ridiculous.
I'm just even thinking about my Switcher. I think was like $80 or $90. And I wouldn't need the Switcher anymore. Like, all of that is just completely irrelevant. So there was a good question up here. Gia San Gigolo. You guys think with the growing popularity of FPGA boards such as the DE10 Nano will become cheap? Will it become cheaper with mass production?
Okay. No, the D10 Nano, the Tragic D10 Nano is also a ridiculous value. It's subsidized by Intel. It's probably about $300 worth of hardware pushed down to $140. Wow. People have asked me, should I commit now to the MiSTer or should I wait till it jumps to the next hardware? I'm like, what next hardware? The MiSTer project was moved from, it was originally called the Mist, and then it moved to the MiSTer when it moved to the D10. The D10 is just a ridiculous amount of hardware. Like I've already said this, but it's like $300 worth of hardware for $140 because it's subsidized. You're supposed to like use this in classrooms to learn on FPGAs.
Yeah, and it's the same hardware that some people are doing cryptocurrency mining on.
Oh,
so that's actually one of the reasons that sometimes it disappears.
Yeah, right.
But no, they have. If it's powerful enough to do that at this cost, it's going to be the best thing you're going to be able to buy right now. So
yeah, you can even run stuff on the ARM side, like ScumVM. Completely runs without the FPGA. It runs on just on the the Android or the ARM side of stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome to hear that there's, it sounds like it's something that's going to be around for a while as well. Developing for any modern platform, one of the things you run into is that there's going to be new hardware, there's going to be there's going to be new developments, but knowing that something is going to stabilize and going to be the same for a while is actually I've heard from developers that actually creates a good environment to develop for. So that's kind of great to hear. Let's see. So we mentioned a little bit what might theoretically be possible, but what is the future for the MiSTer itself? Like, will we continue to see development, let's say for the Nintendo core, the NES core, and what does that future look like, if you will?
Evan, you want to go first?
I'll let you go first.
Okay. So the CPS one is currently being worked on by Jotego. CPS one's like this beefy, I can go grab it. It's this beefy arcade board with a Sharp 68K processor and the giant RAM board and giant like analog control board. That's so on the cool. MiSTer now. Like it's on his Patreon, but that should be public in about a month. He's going to then probably jump to, we expect, CPS 2, which is basically a beefed up CPS 1. So then you'll get all your versions of Street Fighters. You get Marvel vs. Capcom. You'll get like all kinds of really stuff that was powerhouses back in the day in the arcade. Yeah. The Jaguar core is being worked on by Electron Ash and a few other people. Jaguar is like, I mean, I have a Jaguar here somewhere. Why? And it's a Tempest 2000.
There you go.
It's a beautiful, beautiful Tempest 2000 console. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff planned. PC Engine CD could come eventually. That's the most exciting thing, and is that anything could come. You can, like, it's an open source setup. You can look at other people's code. People help you with stuff. You say you want to use something, you want to build an old arcade game that has a 68K processor. There's a perfect one out there. It's you can plug and play and grab modules and recreate stuff for like that. Like, if you're listening, create a bongo arcade game.
Please.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of... there's two big areas that you're going to see. One is going to be... or I guess three big areas. One is going to be new console cores, which there's a handful in production. The next area is going to be in refinement. So you're going to see what's going on, like with the TurboGrafx and the PC Engine, is that they're actually coming back around to it and making even better versions in the hardware description language of the individual chips. So it's going to go from a really, really good to an insanely good core. And then the last one is going to be the push into all of the arcade cores. The arcade cores that are available are a drop in the bucket of what it's capable of. There is so much arcade hardware out there that the MiSTer could handle without any problem. It just requires somebody have the knowledge and have the time to work on it.
Do you mind if I follow up with that for a moment? And what makes arcade so complicated? And I know a little bit about this, but maybe you could just describe, like, why is it tough to... why isn't there just a catch-all? Why isn't there a MAME for the MiSTer, basically?
The big thing is that, especially early on, the arcade hardware was bespoke. Each arcade unit had a separate board that was configured differently and laid out differently. After a few years, they started to realize that was really impractical because they'd have to write games and then build hardware that fit that. So they started to get into things like the Sega System 1 and then eventually CPS and things like that, where there was a base level hardware and then they just added a small amount of hardware, or later in like CPS 3, where it's literally kind of just a ROM cart that sits on the top of it. But they would add just the hardware necessary to do something special for that game.
Right.
So when they originally developed arcade boards, they weren't thinking modular at all. This was something very okay. Gotcha.
No, because they didn't want arcade operators upgrading.
Yeah,
they wanted to buy a whole new cabinet.
Of course.
But eventually, arcade operators like, we're not going to buy any more original cabinets. We need a standard, and they created the JAMA standard, which is then universal, at least for the plugin.
And to your point, and that's why each individual cores have to be made to support a specific hardware, because it's doing one-to-one.
One thing to note about the MiSTer, though, is it is recognized that there are some arcade games that are very similar, like the Galaxian board. Like, there's a Galaxian core, right? So the Galaxian core and the MRA is like the launch file, the MiSTer executable, or was it MiSTer Run Arcade or something like that? Yeah. Basically, it makes the core and the ROMs work together and how they work together. So there is a lot of, like, just recently, Alan SWX, he's been going through all the arcade stuff and then symbolizing the cores to be like, okay, this is mostly a Miss Pac-Man, this is mostly a Galaxian, this is mostly that, and then having the MRAs launch the core in a specific way and tie it into the original ROM like that.
Yeah.
So interesting. So cool.
They've taken suddenly, they had, let's say, 20 different arcade cores, and they realized that there was 100 games that were very close to those 20 cores. And so we've seen a bunch of arcade cores now supporting 4 other games. The Dig Dug 2 core also supports Tower of Druaga and a couple other games.
Yeah, shout outs to Mr. X.
But there we go. Decatron asked us an interesting question that we started to touch upon a little bit, but I'd like to revisit for just a moment. And asks, what is least likely to come to it? And we had mentioned the Saturn and the Sega CD. I have a small anecdotal story here. Is that when I first bought my Turbo EverDrive, I contacted Crix and I'm like, man, I'm a speedrunner. Save states would be like the dream. What can I do to get to the save states? And his response was that because the way the hardware was made, it's really a real challenge to have the entire, hey, there's my EverDrive. It's a real challenge to get the entire system to just come to a stop and freeze that moment in time. I'm curious if some of those same type of problems exist, and then also, on that list, what is least likely to be supported anytime soon? Al, do you might maybe have some info on that?
A lot of people keep on asking about the N64. The N64 is a huge beast of a CPU. It's possible it could probably be implemented, if somebody really wanted to put the time in it, but at what speed, like Evan mentioned earlier, what speed would it run at? Right. It'd actually be easier, like Electron Ash has done, a test of proof to use the original CPU on the N64, which was in routers, it's in modems, it's in, you can find it other than N64, and set a hat on top of the MiSTer, so have it interact with it, and then it just uses the original CPU, and then everything else is handled FPGA. But yeah, you mentioned also, because it is, original hardware, it thinks it's original hardware, it is hard to do save states. Like the Game Boy Advance, the author of the Game Boy Advance core he proved a lot of people wrong that you could have save states, that you can have fast forward, and that because they were willing to do it. The way that they approach stuff is really cool too, is they write the emulator first and then they convert it to they then work on the FPGA stuff, and supposedly I forget what they're working on next, but pretty amazing stuff.
And that was done wasn't that done as a graduate project, research project?
I know the Donpachi stuff is done like that. I'm not sure if the GBA.
Yeah, some of the stuff is being done as university research for embedded hardware developers that are working on getting a master's or a doctorate.
So one of the things we didn't touch on before, and I forgive my ignorance here, is something like Dolphin's NetPlay possible? Does it already exist? Is something like that a possibility for the MiSTer? Or is that a little bit out beyond its reach?
There's a lot of things that are a possibility. If NetPlay could happen. Okay. And down the road, NetPlay could happen. Save states for every core could happen. Retro achievements could happen. A lot of things are theoretical or I can't get the word out. A lot of things could happen, but they're concentrating on getting the foundation first, and then we can go kind of like TurboGrafx is being returned to. Then we can go and add stuff to it down the road.
Yeah, the one that really nice thing is the way that this functions is there's an actual ARM processor on the board, and then the FPGA. So some of the stuff you're doing is actually being run on the ARM processor, and therefore we could run code like NetPlay code on the ARM processor, and it wouldn't have to touch the FPGA. It just depends on if somebody out there is going to step up and write it.
Can't believe I didn't ask this in the first place, but what operating systems are currently supported then? Can it support multiple operating systems? If there is an underlying ARM chip?
It runs a really, really slimmed down version of Linux right now.
Okay, got it. Okay. Which is probably all it needs, I guess. If you're really, it's only just if you're just trying to run something simple to get the console, the core up and going.
You can run the AO 486 core and run DOS and Windows 3.1 and Windows 95 on there.
That's right, because they're supported.
Yeah.
Let's see. This is some good. Let's see if I thought I saw another question that I. This is a cool one. GSN, I keep San Sigilo. I'm sure I'm butchering that name, but this is just for curiosity. But what are the kind of cases people are using? Because I noticed that you could probably set it up in any kind of case you wanted. He was thinking maybe his old Raspberry Pi case might fit, but
it's a little bigger than a Raspberry Pi. But
it is.
Yeah. So there's enclosed cases like the one that I showed off earlier. There's also modular cases. So like I actually helped design and had made up acrylic cases. So it's just an acrylic plate in the bottom, acrylic plate in the top. And then that way you're able to keep the modular aspect of the MiSTer. You can build and, build and take stuff apart or add stuff to it. There's 3D printed cases. And a lot of this stuff is being done open source. Like I released the file for the acrylic plates and then people have modified it and made their own version for sale. Like all I ask is that whenever you do change from my file, you keep it open source. Yeah. So like Zero himself has an open source version, which includes the buttons. I did a cutaway for the buttons. But yeah.
So you could print your own cases. It's that simple, right?
Yeah, you can print your own case.
That's awesome. Let's get a little more practical. I think there's so many, let's say I mean, at this point now, I've watched Smoke Monster's videos. I've done a lot. I've been doing a lot of reading. If I want to dive in, where do I start? Where do I buy this thing? Is there a good place to start to actually, if I'm ready to make the purchase and dive in?
I would start with buying your own D10 Nano and then reaching out to whoever you build a relationship with or wherever you're located. In the U.S., there's MiSTer add-ons. There's Zero himself. There's an Atari thread that I'll link to you that gives the local distributors in your area. But mostly everybody that I've heard of has had good relations with almost everybody. It just depends on what you want, what they have in stock, if you want their specific case. It's open source. So you could even make your own. You could send off the PC boards and make it yourself if you want to. Yeah.
MiSTer Add-ons is who I've bought from in the past. And I think I'm one of his first customers he ever had before he actually had a store. It was just me PayPaling him and talking to him through Twitter.
Right, and I have dealt with Zero himself multiple times. I have a coupon that you can use to get a % off your total package. I've dealt with Ultimate MiSTer. Ricardo over in Portugal is an amazing person. I've heard good things almost about every supplier of MiSTer parts.
Just so if you're wondering, Amazon has the DE10 Nano kit for $140, and DigiKey has it for $130.
Okay, so you get
and
something
they both have
easily
them in stock.
accessible. Yeah. Got it. I got to give a big thank you and shout out to Electron Ash, who actually put me in the direction of Owlnonymous and some others to get some info and put some people together to talk about this. One of the things I learned very quickly is that the project touches all parts of the globe, and so it's interesting too that development like this can happen with language barriers and things and geography and things like that. So I'm really impressed with the way that the community, the way that they're able to interact and support each other, considering some of the issues that may come to barrier to do that. Is there a place where a lot of if I was passionate about this, is there a Discord? Is there a forums? Like, where is a place that I can get it if I'm into the community side of this thing?
So the first place I started hanging out when I wanted to learn about MiSTer stuff was the Smoke Monster Discord. You get an invite once you become like a patron of $1, I think, a month. There's also Classic Gaming Discord is really good for MiSTer talk. They have a whole couple of MiSTer categories. I have a MiSTer thread on my Discord, where we help out each other and keep each other up to date. But there's tons of places. Evan, do you have any other place?
If you go to the GitHub for the actual project, there's a link for discussion, and that goes to the Atari forum for the MiSTer specifically. It's not, I wouldn't call it beginner friendly, because there's a lot of questions on there that if you ask the question, they'll be like, that was in a thread 40 pages ago. Like, go look at that. Stop bugging us. But it's also a really good place because they have a thread that updates every time they make an update. So you can see what the latest cores are and what changes they've made and all that.
There's a few Facebook groups as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, the original, creator, Alexei, also known as Sorg, they update the Atari thread and the MiST and the Facebook thread. That's where you get the official news from the source.
I left off one of the most obvious questions. We didn't even. Is MiSTer an acronym for anything?
Wait, MiSTer is it was originally MIST, which is supposed to be an Atari ST FPGA, wasn't it?
It was Amiga, so that's the MI, and then Atari ST, which is the ST.
I don't know where the error came from.
I think they were it was the plus, it was the MiST plus idea, and then they were like, well, it sounds like MiSTer.
It's a great name, and I like the way it's stylized as well. I like the lowercase I. I think it's pretty cool. Is there any? Go ahead.
Sorry, Evan mentioned earlier about light gun support. There's actually
yeah.
somebody in your chat that is working on light gun support for the Mega Drive and the Mega CD. Shane in there, but yeah, they're adding it. So he wanted light gun support, so he's adding light gun support. Like you can fork anything and create it and submit it, and then if it gets taken, it's taken, or it can be changed. Like since it's open source, you can just fork something and then work on it yourself. Like all the LLAPI stuff, the low lag stuff, that's forked from the original. It's not supported officially, but it's forked.
Yeah.
So it's supported that way.
And I assume that the only limitations of light guns would be what it is now, where you have to use a CRT TV. You couldn't, do this on a modern display, right? Something like that.
I think so. Shane would be better at answering that. But I think you want to use an original monitor, but I think there is HDMI support using a
that's right.
Like
they have
the Dolphin bar and a Wiimote.
Yeah.
That's wild. That is so cool.
Or a mouse. You can also use a mouse. It'll give you a mouse.
Shane in the chat right now is actually commenting. Adding motion control support for HDTVs. There you go.
There we go. Awesome.
That's something that I keep coming back to, and I know. And wait, there's more. I'm selling it some more. But I love the fact when the only thing that's limiting at this point is obviously whatever the hardware is. But I mean but that the creativity. There's really no limitation to the creativity. And what if you want to see something on this MiSTer, you can go and do it. And I just it blows my mind. I keep saying. I always keep saying, hey, the next console I'm going to get or whatever. And right now, the next console I'm going to get is for sure the MiSTer because of how it does everything. It's really impressive what it can do. Good.
It's so hard not to sell the MiSTer when you talk about it. Like I try to keep an objective view, and I do a lot of the times, but when I talk about it, I'm trying to sell you on it. I mean, honestly, I'm trying to sell it. That's like my main focus of my stream of my last year has been pushing the MiSTer. Has been shoving it down people's throats, and they realize, oh, this is really cool. Like I personally built 40 and shipped them to people, and so many other people comment because I have YouTube stuff where I tell people show people how to set up the SD card, show how to do builds, and people are like, "You're the reason, meanie. You made me spend money."
Yeah. Well. But, and Smoke Monster mentioned it earlier, but you guys aren't getting any marketing kickbacks either, and you're all passionate about it, which I think is really cool.
And I don't even charge anything when I build them.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that helps out. Like, if you're going to go down this road, that there is a supportive community out there. Like, I got to be honest, when I first started speedrunning, there wasn't a TurboGrafx 16 Discord or anything like that, but this is the console I was passionate about. And just having a community come together around it and people that could support each other, it makes a huge difference. It's like, oh man, I have a question, I can ask it, and somebody might know the answer or might be able to help me. Yeah. So... is there anything I'm missing? I feel like we covered all of our topics, but I always feel like there's with this there's more.
Let me look at this this list that you went through.
I appreciate it. Just there are so many good step-by-step tutorials and stuff like that. I don't think we need to do something like that for this. I think this is more about the capabilities and things like that.
Yeah, that also wouldn't make good audio listening.
Right. That's the other part. Yes. You can load cores on demand from a menu and switch at will. That's awesome. That's one thing I would like to cover actually. When you get your MiSTer started, there is a graphical user interface, right. And I didn't think it was actually that complicated. But Al, could you walk us through a little? We'll start with Al, and then Evan, you can chime in here. What is that? What is the graphical user? How easy is it to switch between consoles, cores, that kind of thing?
Right, so the graphic interface is super simple, and it's like that on purpose. It doesn't have all the flashy images of the carts and descriptions of the games. It's basically just a launcher. So the main menu, you can choose arcade stuff, computer stuff, console stuff, and then from there, you program your controller in there, and then you go to the core, and then the core has a very similar on-screen diagnostic or display for loading the ROM. You load the ROM. And then, any options you want to change there. If you're in the Genesis core, you can change what model Genesis you have, what kind of audio you have. But it's all very simple. It's simple on purpose.
Yeah. Evan, when you were showing me your MiSTer, I also noticed how quickly it loaded up and how quickly it was to switch between. Like, it's really fluid and doesn't it's hardly any time wasted as you're switching through these things.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
There you go.
He beat me to it. I was doing that same thing. Okay. But it's really easy. on the controller, like if you use a Xbox 360 controller or whatever, there's a button that you can set, and you just press the button, and the main menu comes up, and you can change cores. You can, inside of a core, you can change ROMs. If you output to the HDMI, you can actually add in like cool filters. So you get like a CRT filter, or you can get an LCD effect filter, so it'll look like the original Game Boy. Oh yes, Mary Kate and Ashley.
This is actually one of the games that Evan showed me.
Yeah.
You loaded up Mary Kate and Ashley as well?
Did. Maybe it wasn't you. Maybe it was somebody else. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, there are 3 bangers for the Game Boy Advance.
Yeah.
This is probably my favorite one.
My favorite is the GBA videos.
Oh yeah, the GBA videos are great. Yeah,
that's a real thing.
But yeah, so okay, look, we're in the Game Boy Advance, right? So we could load a game right here just through this. We could switch to a different Mary Kate and Ashley game if you wanted to. And I mean, the Game Boy Advances are pretty large, but it's already loaded. So we're already into the next game. Say you wanted to go, and then you don't even have to go back to the main menu. You can go to a different core here, and I can load a Game Boy game. So right here, we'll go right into a Game Boy game, and you can also say what game you want it to load automatically by putting it in the boot folder.
Real quick, and as we start to wrap this thing up, I appreciate you both giving me so much time. Sanjigalo, do you guys think that you should jump into the MiSTer right now? And the answer is obviously yes. I think that Al mentioned it earlier that there's no reason to wait, because it's not gonna, as far as I understand, we have the hardware that we're gonna have. Is that accurate, Al?
Yes. Yeah, okay. And jump in now, and then everything that comes past this date is a bonus.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that was the thing that really, when I bought it and I was like, okay, it does this stuff. And then I realized a week after I bought it, it did 5% more. And then a week after that, it did 5% more.
Yeah.
And I mean, it wanes and waxes, sometimes we're getting a lot of stuff all at once, and sometimes there'll be a month or two where it's just little updates. But it's more valuable now than when I bought it.
Yeah, my biggest win recently was Game Boy getting dual output, because previously it was single output.
Yeah.
So now I can play Game Boy on my PVM and have HDMI. So I'm able to play some of my favorite Game Boy games.
There are many Game Boy games and Game Boy Advance that I would love to stream and speedrun, and I just haven't had a way to do so. And this is way less than the 3DS capture cards and things like that. And I know it doesn't support 3DS yet, but I mean, Game Boy Advance, what do you need? You need the Game Boy player and all that kind of stuff.
GameCube,
right?
official cables, all kinds of business.
Yeah.
So let's see. I kind of feel what Sentient Shane says. My MiSTer makes me question all my real hardware. Well, that's fair.
A lot of people I know that are into the MiSTer have sold the original hardware. I'm holding on to anything, so I don't have any regrets.
Right.
But I'm telling you, if there was an arcade game that came, like if I had a Double Dragon arcade board, which my friend Smoke just sold, I would have sold it. There's a lot of stuff that's coming to arcade stuff. I've always wanted CPS1 stuff. I have 2 dead CPS1 boards. They're very problematic boards. And then I have one working one. CPS1 coming to the MiSTer is huge for me, because those games are expensive, and they're hard to find, and they die, because they have all kinds of encryption and stuff like that. And
yeah, you have to mod your CPS1 boards. The B board, right? The B board that has the
A board's the CPU, the B board is the ROM data, and then the C board is the controls and additional stuff.
Okay, so you have to mod the A board to remove the battery and replace it with the InfiniKey, or I think there's one other option, but it basically, the way it worked is there was an encrypted ROM and a battery, and if the battery died, the encrypted ROM died.
Oh, geez. So it makes the game unusable, right? Or the whole thing unusable, yeah.
Yep. They call them suicides.
It was done like that on purpose, too, that if the battery died, you lost the language.
Yep.
Thanks to Arcade Hacker. Yeah, thanks to Arcade Hacker, they've preserved and figured out a lot of that encryption for CPS1 and CPS2 and a bunch of other battery-based encryption methods.
I will also add that for those of us that enjoy participating in live marathons, some live marathons would prefer that you use the original hardware. But things like arcade and things like that, there's not an easy way for a live marathon to support something like that. So the MiSTer still would be totally be accepted. I'm sure you'd have to talk with people and stuff, but I would assume that the MiSTer would, like, Zallard, when he did his Punch Out arcade run recently, was done on the Switch. So when you do things that are just impossible, not impossible, but very challenging to get actual hardware there, this would be a perfect way to support that. Or to
it'd be a huge goal if we got a MiSTer supported device into GDQ.
Mm-hmm. A MiSTer demo, absolutely.
There's so much arcade stuff that people have wanted to submit to GDQ, but they're so strict on emulation that it's not really easy to do.
What's it? L-Rock's Ninja Turtles run this year at AGDQ. He actually did his on was it PlayStation or Xbox?
So any official port is fine because that's an official port. Anybody can buy that and anybody can compete on that same platform. I think that's what their main concern with emulation is.
Yeah, we'll see. For SGDQ 2020, I'm planning on submitting, which I guess I got to do next week, a panel or a panel in quotation marks. It might just be me up there on FPGAs, MiSTer, and the future of hardware preservation. Right. And we'll see how open they are to that, because if they turn me down, it might be in something more political than that they just don't want that panel.
Or time, there's a plethora.
There's a lot of things. There's a lot of things. But if they let me in, then they at least see that as a future. That's the way I look at it.
That's it. I saw an interesting question by Sentient, but I don't know if it's something to include. But is there a possibility of creating tool-assisted speedruns on the MiSTer?
Yeah, there is Risha has provided a few people with access to a NES that accepts task scripts, and it works, and it's verified. So I actually talked to Dwango at the SGDQ we were at, or AGDQ we were at. Which one we were? We were at AGDQ. I talked with him about MiSTer, and he kept on asking all these questions I couldn't answer, and then I eventually got back to him and then sent him links for everything. But yeah. It can run task stuff. So I mean, if the MiSTer is, specifically NES Core is able to run a task script and it works, that helps verify the console.
Yeah. Yeah,
Very cool.
If it performs well enough to support a task script, then it probably is pretty close to the real hardware.
Right.
Very cool. Evan and I did a panel at, I don't remember, it was SGDQ with the TaskBot Dwango, and it's nice to have. It's nice when communities come together to work like that. We've had a couple of taskers on the podcast. Big fan of that, and the fact that those things are actually working on the MiSTer. That's just another avenue for people to use. And wait, there's more. Okay, sorry. We'll keep going there, but that's really cool. Okay, thanks guys. I appreciate you both giving us so much time. Why don't we do a quick plug? Al, if people were interested in your stuff and seeing where are you on the internet, where can people find you?
Best places to find me is on Twitch, twitch.tv/Owlnonymous, and Twitter, Owlnonymous. I'm Owlnonymous everywhere, so you can talk to me personally on Discord and in stream.
I got to give a quick plug to Al. I literally just started. I should have started there earlier because I've known who Al is for a while now. But I only started watching the stream a couple months ago. And if you want to see actual pinball hardware, he mentioned it at the beginning of the podcast. But he actually has cameras set up. It's really, really cool, and it's nicely lit and everything. It's really awesome to watch.
That's a huge pain in the ass.
It's really well done, dude. Evan, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitch, Twitter, and Instagram at EvanGrill. On Twitch, it's not happening right now because my workbench isn't set up yet, but a lot of times what I'm doing is, rather than retro games, I'm actually doing hardware repair.
I love those streams.
Yeah,
they're really fun.
It's a really interesting thing to do. It's really fun to stop and talk to people about what I'm doing. Even when I break things, which I've done, it's still a learning experience, and people are still learning from me, and I'm still learning.
And I got to tell you, Evan, I thought that was actually one of the most educational, it was one of the more entertaining, obviously, as well. But the most recent one where you modding, I forgot what you were modding.
I did an RGB mod for SNES Junior, And I got it most of the way there, and then I carelessly, I think I figured out what I did, which was that I accidentally was trying to solder while the console was turned on.
Ooh.
Yeah, and
Oops.
I killed the CPU on it.
Oh, dang.
The nice thing is I have a spare, and actually the case for it is really nice. So I've been looking online on eBay, and there's a few SNES Juniors that are showing up with really yellowed cases. So what I might do is buy one of those, do the mod, and swap it in.
Do you have
And I'll have
a do you have a hot air workflow? Can you
I-
change the SMD main CPU?
I don't have a hot air rework station yet. I want to get one. I would actually probably change the entire motherboard into.
I mean, that'd be easier for sure.
Yeah, but I really want a hot air rework station. A lot of the stuff I've done where it's been really hard for me to do it, would have been made much easier with just some hot air.
Yep. And a lot of flux.
Yep.
Well, guys, thanks once again. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. If you're enjoying the podcast, subscribe, leave a review. All those things go a long way to helping out the podcast. If you'd like to continue the conversation, I'm on Twitter @LatMackey, or you can also join the LatMackey Discord, where we have a sequence break channel. We talk about guests, we have questions. It's really interactive, really fun. Please feel free to stop on by. Thanks so much. See you in the next one.